When people talk about Chinese history, they usually talk about heroes. They talk about Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Sun Quan, Qin Shi Huang, Zhuge Liang, or Guan Yu. Each of them seems to represent a certain idea: ambition, morality, loyalty, order, or strategy. These stories are dramatic and easy to remember. And for many people, history feels more interesting when it is told through the lives of individuals. But if we step back a little, a different pattern appears. No matter which hero wins, no matter which general becomes emperor, the structure of history often looks the same. A dynasty rises. It becomes strong. It creates order and prosperity. Then, over time, it weakens. Corruption grows. Taxes increase. Rebellions begin. And eventually, the dynasty collapses. After that comes chaos. And from that chaos, a new ruler appears. A new dynasty begins. This pattern repeated again and again for more than 2,000 years. Historians later called it the dynasty cycle. In many parts of the world, history is told as the story of countries. France, England, Rome, America. Political systems changed. Kings were overthrown. Republics were founded. Empires rose and fell. But the idea of the state often survived those changes. In China, for most of its history, the situation was different. People did not think in terms of modern nations. They thought in terms of dynasties. A person might say, "I live under the Han," or "I live under the Tang." The ruling house defined the age. When the dynasty was strong, people felt safe. When the dynasty was weak, life became uncertain. So the fate of the dynasty was not just a political issue. It shaped everyday life. Most dynasties began in similar circumstances. The old dynasty became weak. Officials grew corrupt. Taxes became heavy. Natural disasters or rebellions spread. At some point, people stopped believing the dynasty could protect them. In traditional Chinese political thinking, this was called losing the mandate of heaven. This did not mean a god made a formal announcement. It meant reality itself showed the dynasty was no longer fit to rule. Floods, famine, rebellion, and war were all seen as signs. And when these signs appeared, new leaders emerged. The founders of dynasties were often not born into power. Liu Bang, founder of the Han Dynasty, had once been a low-level official. Zhu Yuanzhang, founder of the Ming Dynasty, had once been a poor peasant and a monk. Many rulers came from military families, not royal bloodlines. They did not win because of noble birth. They won because they could restore order. If they could end wars, feed the population, and control the land, they were seen as legitimate rulers. Success itself became proof of the mandate of heaven. After a new dynasty was founded, there was usually a period of recovery. Taxes were reduced. Land was redistributed. Corrupt officials were punished. The army was reorganized. After years of war, people could return to farming, trading, and building families again. These were often the strongest years of a dynasty. The early Fan, the early Tang, the early Ming. Later generations would call these times golden ages. But golden ages rarely lasted forever. As time passed, the founding generation died. Their sons and grandsons inherited the throne, but not always their discipline or ability. Court politics became complicated. Relatives of the emperor fought for influence. Eunuchs and powerful officials formed factions. Meanwhile, outside the capital, life grew harder. Population increased. Land concentrated in the hands of wealthy families. Small farmers lost their land. Taxes became heavier. The empire still looked strong from the outside, but its foundation was weakening. At first, the problem seemed small. A rebellion in one province. Bandits on certain roads, a famine in a distant region. But over time, these problems spread and connected. The army lost discipline. Officials ignored the law. The court lost control of the provinces. Eventually, the dynasty entered its final stage. This was the moment when heroes appeared. Not because history needed heroes, but because the old system was breaking down. Local generals raised their own armies. Officials turned into warlords. Rebels tried to build their own states. The Three Kingdoms was one of these periods. The Han Dynasty had ruled for 400 years, but by the late 2nd century, corruption, court struggles, and heavy taxation had weakened it. Rebellions spread across the land. Central authority collapsed. Regional powers rose. Out of this chaos came Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Sun Quan. Each of them tried to rebuild order. Each believed he had the right solution, but their struggle was not outside the dynasty cycle. It was part of it. Eventually, the wars ended. In the year 280, the Jin dynasty unified the land. The Three Kingdoms disappeared, but the cycle continued. Later, the Sui unified the land. Then the Tang rose. Then the Tam fell. Then came the Song, the Yuan, the Ming, and the Qing. Each dynasty followed a similar path: rise from chaos, strong early rule, growth and stability, political decay, collapse, and then chaos again. Over centuries, this repeated experience left a deep mark on Chinese society. People did not just study history, they lived inside its patterns. Again and again, they saw what happened when order disappeared. Cities burned, armies looted, farmers fled their homes. Families were separated by war and famine. So over time, a certain political instinct developed. Stability became more important than abstract ideals. Order became more important than sudden change. A strong government, even if imperfect, was often seen as better than chaos, because chaos was not an idea, it was a memory. In many Western societies, the historical experience was different. Power was more fragmented. Kings competed with nobles. Cities fought for autonomy. Churches challenged rulers. Revolutions overthrew monarchies. Political systems changed again and again. Kingdoms, republics, empires, democracies. As a result, change itself became part of the political tradition. Reform, revolution, and institutional innovation were often seen as necessary steps forward. In Chinese history, however, large-scale change was often tied to the fall of a dynasty. And the fall of a dynasty usually meant war, famine, and suffering. So people became cautious. They did not always resist change, but they feared disorder more than they desired innovation. A reform that risked chaos could look more dangerous than a system that was slow or imperfect but stable. This difference in historical experience helped shape two different political temperaments. In much of the Western world, change could be seen as progress. In traditional Chinese thinking, stability was often seen as the foundation of everything else. Without order, there was no morality, no prosperity, and no culture. Only survival. When we look back at the heroes of the Three Kingdoms today, it is easy to focus on their personalities. Cao Cao, the ambitious. Liu Bei, the moral ruler. Sun Quan, the balanced leader. Guan Yu, the symbol of loyalty. But their stories only make sense inside the larger structure of the dynasty cycle. They were not just shaping history, they were responding to it. They were individuals trying to act in a system that was already collapsing. The Three Kingdoms was not a unique moment. It was one example of a pattern that appeared again and again. A dynasty weakens, chaos spreads, new rulers rise, and new dynasty begins. For more than 2,000 years, this cycle shaped the political structure of China. So if we want to understand Chinese history, we cannot only study its heroes. We also have to study its dynasties, how they began, how they ruled, and how they came to an end. Because in the long run, it was the rise and fall of dynasties that shaped the story of China. And once you start looking at history this way, a new question naturally appears. Where did the first dynasty begin? And how did that long cycle actually start?